In an earlier video, I showed you how to attach a smaller Harbor Freight Centeral Forge bench vise, like the one you see on the left, to your Black and Decker Workmate 425. This little vise has a great deal of versatility, especially with the integral clamp, which allows you to attach it to working surfaces quickly and easily. If you plan on working on projects that require a heavy-duty vise, you'll need a vise like the larger one on the right. However, this vise does not have an integral clamp, which means attaching it to your Workmate 425 takes a little more effort. I'll show you how to attach this vise to your Workmate 3 different ways. Now, I'm using a Harbor Freight vise as the example in this video. You should be able to adapt these techniques to just about any vise you decide is best for your workshop. I put the links to the videos I referred to in the description, so let's get started. Let's take a look at the first of 3 methods for mounting your bench vise to your Workmate 425. The first thing you'll need is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood cut to 14 by 18 inches. You could go larger or smaller depending on your needs, but let's use this size as a starting point for your project. Here we're looking at the bottom of the board you'll be using to mount your vise. You'll need to drill 4 holes to allow the bolts to pass down through the dog holes in your Workmate. These are marked with a B. You'll also need to drill the holes for your vise. This vise has 3 places for holes. The vise you finally decide on may have as many as 4 places for bolts. The holes for the vise are marked with a V. Simply lay the back panel of your Workmate on the plywood and mark through the dog holes and do the same thing for your vise. Notice that you'll need to countersink the holes for the vise so that the plywood mount will lie flat on your Workmate or other working surface when you bolt or clamp it down. Next, you will need to attach your vise to the plywood from the back like you see here. Using washers, pass the bolts through the bottom of the plywood in the holes marked with a V. Again, these holes are countersunk so that the plywood will lie flat when you bolt it or clamp it to your Workmate or other working surfaces. So let's come around to the side and take a look at how the vise is mounted from another angle. So here you can see that I've used wing nuts to hold the vise onto the plywood. But that's how you're going to bolt it onto the board you're going to use to mount it onto your Workmate or other working surfaces. The next step is to attach your vise, which is already mounted on the 3/4 inch piece of plywood, to your Workmate by passing 4 bolts with washers down through the dog holes into the back panel. If you plan on occasionally taking your vise on and off your Workmate, you may want to use wing nuts on both sides as I've done here. If you believe you'll be swiveling your vise in place, you'll need to use shorter bolts than I have in this example, so they don't interfere with the vise as you swivel it around. Of course, if you choose a different vise, you may need to go with shorter or longer bolts than the ones you see here. Of course, you could simply drill some holes in your Workmate panel and mount your vise directly. However, the 3/4 inch plywood will add a degree of stability to the mounting of your vise. I flipped my Workmate over so you can see how the assembly looks from the bottom. As you can see, I've used wing nuts to hold the bolts in place. Again, if you will be leaving your vise attached to your Workmate for some time, you may prefer to use regular bolts and lock washers for a sturdier assembly. Let's take a look at the second of 3 methods for mounting your bench vise to your Workmate 425. If you don't want to take the time to bolt your vise assembly to your Workmate, you can always simply clamp it down as you see here. I'm using quick clamps in this example. However, you can obviously use C clamps or F clamps to hold the assembly to your Workmate. If you think you may use this approach, you may want to use a larger or wider piece of plywood than I have here, so you can apply more clamps and keep them further away from the vise so they don't interfere with the piece you'll be working on. Let's look at the third way you can mount your vise to your Workmate 425. In this approach, you attach your bench vise to a length of 2 by 8. You could clamp the 2 by 8 between the front and back panels, or you could attach it as the final panel on your Workmate, as I have done here. You'll notice that the 2 by 8 is much thicker than your standard Workmate panel. This will provide you with greater stability for your heavier duty projects. The parts that keep the panels locked into the frame of your Workmate are made of hard plastic. If you plan on doing some hard pounding on the anvil of your vise, they may not hold up. Instead, you can add bolts to the 2 by 8 and lock it into the slots found in the frame of your Workmate. I placed the link to the video in which I show how to make a custom panel like this, along with all the parts, in the description below. In the video I did of the smaller vise, you can see more methods of attaching a bench vise to your Workmate that you may choose to adapt to a larger vise like this one, and I've put the link to that video in the description below. I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please press like and of course share with your friends. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks for watching, and as always, good luck on your projects.